My husband swapped my $1 million diamonds for fakes, so I let him sell forgeries to an undercover agent. My name is Clara. I was born with a jeweler's loupe in my hand and a profound, almost obsessive reverence for the hidden architecture of the earth. Before we continue, please subscribe and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps this powerful, life-changing story reach the world. My father was an impoverished watchmaker who taught me that true perfection is entirely invisible to the naked eye. It exists in the microscopic, unforgiving details. While other children played outside, I spent my youth hunched over a brightly lit workbench, learning the complex physics of light refraction, the rigid Mohs scale of mineral hardness, and the precise, incredibly delicate art of cleaving raw stones. By the time I was 28, I had transformed my obsessive passion into a highly exclusive, globally renowned bespoke jewelry firm called Aura Gemology. I didn't just sell jewelry. I sourced, cut, and polished the rarest, most flawless diamonds on the planet for billionaires, royalty, and elite collectors. I was a quiet, fiercely independent woman who preferred the silent, solitary company of my high-powered microscopes to the loud, chaotic world of high society. That is exactly why I was so easily blinded when a charismatic, aggressively extroverted man named Tristan walked into my secure boutique. Tristan was a highly successful, impeccably dressed luxury logistics broker who specialized in the secure, international transport of priceless art and jewels. He was incredibly charming, fluent in 5 languages, and possessed an innate, predatory ability to navigate the complex, high-stakes world of the ultra-wealthy. We fell in love with a terrifying, intoxicating speed. When we married, it felt like the absolute perfect fusion of art and commerce. I was the brilliant, introverted master gemologist, and he was the suave, incredibly capable chief operations officer. I gladly handed him the heavy, administrative keys to my kingdom. He took over the complex international customs paperwork, the multi-million-dollar insurance policies, and the aggressive negotiations with our elite clientele. I trusted my husband implicitly, believing that his relentless drive to maximize our profits was simply his way of fiercely protecting our shared future. I retreated happily into my secure, climate-controlled design studio, surrounded by velvet trays of loose diamonds. I had absolutely no idea that I had just given a highly sophisticated, deeply greedy parasite direct, unfettered access to my entire life's work. For the first 4 years of our marriage, Aura Gemology experienced an unprecedented, explosive era of global success. We were generating tens of millions of dollars in annual revenue. I was working grueling 90-hour weeks, personally designing breathtaking, gravity-defying diamond necklaces and tiaras for international red carpets and royal weddings. The sheer physical and mental exhaustion was immense, but I pushed through it because I genuinely believed Tristan and I were building an unbreakable generational empire. Tristan constantly reassured me that our massive wealth was being safely routed into high-yield, secure offshore investment portfolios. He wore bespoke Italian suits, drove a massively expensive luxury sports car, and projected the flawless image of an undefeated, highly devoted corporate titan. But beneath the glittering, perfectly curated surface of his life, a dark, terrifying rot was beginning to spread. Tristan wasn't investing our hard-earned millions. He was systematically, quietly robbing me blind to fund a massive, highly illicit double life. The absolute pinnacle of my career arrived when I was exclusively commissioned by a prominent Middle Eastern royal family to source and cut a legendary, historically significant gem. It was a massive 50-carat, vivid pink rough diamond known as the Sovereign Rose. It was an incredibly rare, flawless miracle of nature, conservatively valued at over $80 million. The commission required me to spend 8 grueling, agonizing months meticulously cutting and polishing the rough stone into a breathtaking, brilliant cut centerpiece for a platinum necklace. The pressure was astronomical. One single, microscopic miscalculation with the laser cutter could instantly shatter the stone, utterly destroying $80 million and my entire professional reputation in a fraction of a second. Because I was entirely consumed by the immense stress of the Sovereign Rose project, I completely ignored the subtle, deeply troubling changes in Tristan's behavior. I was too busy staring through my microscope to notice the massive, highly dangerous predator lurking directly inside my own home. The initial red flags were subtle, perfectly masked by his charming, gaslighting demeanor. Tristan began taking frequent, highly secretive logistics trips to Antwerp and Dubai, claiming he was negotiating secure transport routes for the sovereign rose. He became fiercely, aggressively protective of his smartphone and his heavy leather briefcase, violently changing his passwords and snapping at me if I ever walked into his home office unannounced. He also began executing massive, highly unusual inventory audits in my secure vault, claiming our insurance underwriters required strict, weekly visual inspections of all our loose diamonds. Because I was desperately trying to finalize the complex platinum setting for the pink diamond, I foolishly allowed him unchecked, solitary access to the highest security areas of my studio. I wanted to believe he was just doing his job. I was completely oblivious to the fact that my brilliant, sophisticated husband was executing a slow, highly meticulous and utterly devastating heist right under my nose. The horrifying truth finally broke through my oblivious bubble late one rainy evening. Tristan had rushed out to a client dinner, leaving his expensive trench coat draped over a chair in the hallway. I was looking for a pen to sign a delivery receipt when I reached into his coat pocket. My fingers brushed against a small, stiff piece of laminated cardstock. I pulled it out and the air completely left my lungs. It was an official gemological certification card from an obscure low-end laboratory in Eastern Europe. The certificate detailed the exact cut, carat weight and dimensions of a flawless 5-carat round diamond. But the stone wasn't natural. The certificate clearly listed the origin as CVD, chemical vapor deposition. It was a lab-grown synthetic diamond. It was chemically identical to a real diamond, but virtually worthless on the high-end luxury market. The terrifying problem was that the exact dimensions and carat weight listed on the cheap certificate perfectly matched a highly valuable, naturally mined diamond I had securely stored in my vault for a VIP client. My heart hammering violently against my ribs, I sprinted down the hall to my secure, heavily armored home studio. I bypassed the biometric locks, pulled the specific 5-carat diamond from the velvet tray, and placed it under my highly specialized state-of-the-art thermal spectrometer. Natural diamonds and lab-grown diamonds look completely identical to the naked eye, but they possess entirely different, microscopic growth patterns that only a $1 million spectrometer can detect. I initiated the scan, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The machine whirred softly, analyzing the atomic structure of the stone. Seconds later, the digital screen flashed a bright, undeniable red warning. Synthetic origin confirmed. CVD growth pattern detected. I stared at the screen, a wave of pure, suffocating nausea washing over me. Tristan had stolen the natural $3 million diamond and replaced it with a cheap $3,000 lab-grown fake. Driven by a sudden, terrifying adrenaline rush, I spent the entire night frantically auditing every single loose diamond in my massive inventory. The results were absolutely catastrophic. Over the past year, Tristan had systematically stolen nearly $20 million worth of my natural high-grade diamonds, meticulously replacing every single one of them with flawless, lab-grown synthetics. He had been quietly liquidating the real stones on the international black market, hoarding the massive untaxed cash profits. But as I desperately searched his home office for answers, bypassing his computer password with a hidden keystroke logger I had installed years ago, I discovered something infinitely more devastating than the stolen money. I found a massive hidden folder of highly explicit emails and photographs. Tristan was having a passionate, wildly expensive affair with Isabella, a notoriously ruthless, incredibly vapid rival jewelry broker who had always despised me. He was using my stolen millions to buy her luxury yachts, penthouse apartments and designer wardrobes. As I read through the sickening emails, the true apocalyptic magnitude of his betrayal finally revealed itself. The $20 million in stolen inventory was just the warm-up. Tristan and Isabella were meticulously orchestrating the ultimate devastating grand finale. The emails detailed a highly illegal, profoundly sociopathic conspiracy surrounding the $80 million sovereign rose. Tristan's plan was to wait until I had flawlessly finished cutting the massive pink diamond. Then, under the guise of transporting it to a high-security freeport in Geneva for a final insurance appraisal before delivering it to the royal family, he was going to secretly swap the real sovereign rose with a massive, perfectly colored pink cubic zirconia fake. He was going to sell the real $80 million diamond to a highly dangerous, shadowy Russian cartel buyer in Geneva. Once the massive wire transfer cleared, he and Isabella planned to permanently vanish to a non-extradition country, leaving me completely bankrupt, blissfully unaware and holding a worthless piece of pink glass. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of his plan completely shattered me. He didn't just want to steal my wealth, he wanted to entirely destroy my life. When the royal family eventually received the fake pink diamond and had their own gemologists appraise it, the catastrophic fallout would fall entirely on my shoulders. I would be arrested for international fraud, my elite reputation would be permanently incinerated on global television, and I would spend the rest of my life rotting in a federal prison while Tristan drank champagne on a stolen yacht. I sat in his dark office for hours, staring at the glowing screen, trembling with a mixture of profound, agonizing grief and sheer, blinding terror. If I confronted him right now, he would panic, instantly flee the country with the 20 million he had already stolen, and leave me holding a massive vault full of fake inventory that would bankrupt my company anyway. I couldn't scream. I had to become the coldest, most calculating version of myself to survive the impending execution. I quietly forwarded the entire, damning email thread and the undeniable evidence of the offshore cartel negotiations to a highly secure, encrypted server. I wiped my fingerprints from his desk and went to bed, locking my shattered heart away in a dark, inaccessible vault in my mind. When Tristan returned the next morning, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and smiling his charismatic lying smile, I greeted him with a warm kiss. I cooked his breakfast, asked about his client meetings, and played the role of the devoted, exhausted, oblivious wife with terrifying perfection. The second he left for the office, I drove straight to the sleek, highly secure headquarters of the FBI's elite art and jewel crime division. I sat in a soundproof room with Special Agent Marcus Thorne, sliding the heavily encrypted hard drive across the metal table. I laid out the entire devastating conspiracy, providing undeniable microscopic proof of the synthetic diamond swaps and the impending $80 million cartel sale. Agent Thorne was furious, but I quickly laid out the strict, non-negotiable parameters of my counteroffensive. I explicitly told the FBI that they could not simply arrest Tristan for the inventory theft now. If they intervened too early, he would hire expensive lawyers, claim I was the one who bought the lab-grown diamonds, and tie the entire case up in years of grueling, messy civil litigation. To guarantee a massive, inescapable federal prison sentence, the FBI had to let him execute the $80 million grand finale. They had to catch him actively, legally attempting to sell the sovereign rose to the Russian cartel on international soil. Agent Thorne, recognizing the absolute ruthless brilliance of the trap, enthusiastically agreed. We formulated a highly complex, devastating sting operation. The FBI immediately contacted their international counterparts at Interpol and the Swiss Federal Police. But the most brilliant part of the plan was the buyer. The shadowy Russian cartel agent that Isabella had brokered the massive deal with was actually an undercover European federal agent. Tristan was willingly walking into a highly coordinated, heavily armed international trap. For the next 3 weeks, I worked with a manic, obsessive intensity in my studio. I finally completed the breathtaking, flawless cut of the sovereign rose. It was the most magnificent, awe-inspiring diamond I had ever seen, radiating a deep, fiery pink brilliance that defied logic. I also secretly manufactured the decoy. Using a massive, highly expensive piece of lab-grown pink sapphire, I perfectly replicated the exact dimensions, the facet arrangements and the specific weight of the real diamond. To the naked eye, the fake was absolutely indistinguishable from the $80 million original. But I didn't just make a perfect visual copy. I embedded a highly specific deadly digital guillotine directly onto the girdle of the fake stone. Using a microscopic high-powered laser, I etched a tiny, undeniable serial number onto the edge of the sapphire, legally registering it in the International Gem Database as a known synthetic replica. The night before the transport, I dramatically called Tristan into the secure studio, my voice trembling with fake exhaustion and overwhelming joy. "It's finished, Tristan," I told him, stepping back to reveal the massive pink stone resting on a velvet cushion. Tristan's eyes widened to the size of massive saucers. He stared at the gorgeous, vibrant diamond, completely blinded by his own astronomical greed. He pulled me into a tight, highly enthusiastic embrace, kissing the top of my head. "You are an absolute genius, Clara," he whispered, his voice trembling with dark, predatory excitement. "This stone is going to secure our future forever." I hugged him back, smiling a cold, utterly terrifying smile into the empty room. I know, I replied softly. This diamond is going to change our lives. I carefully placed the stone into a heavily armored, biometric transport case. What Tristan didn't know was that while he was pouring us a glass of celebratory champagne, I had swiftly and silently swapped the real sovereign rose for the microscopic laser-etched fake. The next morning, Tristan packed his tailored suits and took the armored transport case, aggressively kissing me goodbye at the door. I'll have the insurance appraisal finished in Geneva by Friday, my love, he lied flawlessly. Then we can finally celebrate. I watched his luxury car pull out of the driveway, feeling the deep, profound calm of a sniper watching their target step directly onto the painted X. He was flying across the Atlantic Ocean, completely unaware that he was tightly clutching a worthless piece of pink sapphire, marching blindly toward his own absolute catastrophic destruction. The real $80 million sovereign rose was already safely locked inside a heavily guarded blind trust vault I had secretly opened under my maiden name, entirely out of his legal reach. The climax of the betrayal unfolded exactly as I knew it would. Friday evening arrived in Geneva. Tristan and Isabella, practically vibrating with arrogant, euphoric triumph, walked into a highly secure private viewing room inside the Geneva Freeport, a massive tax-free bunker used by billionaires to store priceless art and jewels. From a heavily armored Interpol mobile command center parked a mile away, I sat next to Agent Thorne, watching the high-definition video feed from a microscopic camera the Swiss police had secretly installed in the room. We watched as Tristan confidently placed the armored case on the steel table, unlocking it to reveal the massive, glowing pink stone to the undercover federal agent posing as the Russian cartel buyer. $80 million exactly as promised, Tristan said smoothly, his charismatic smile in full force. Isabella stood next to him, wearing an incredibly expensive designer gown purchased with my stolen money, smirking with sheer toxic greed. The undercover agent pulled out a jeweler's loupe, pretending to carefully inspect the massive pink stone. He nodded in satisfaction and pulled out a heavy, encrypted satellite phone. The stone is flawless, the agent said in a thick, fake accent. I am authorizing the $80 million wire transfer to your offshore Cayman account now. Tristan and Isabella erupted into euphoric, celebratory laughter, passionately kissing each other in the center of the secure room. They had won. They were multimillionaires, completely free to escape into their stolen paradise. Now, Agent Thorne, I whispered softly into the quiet command center. Thorne nodded sharply and spoke into his radio. Execute the breach. Less than 10 seconds later, the heavy steel doors of the private viewing room were violently smashed open. Dozens of heavily armed, fully tactical Swiss Federal Police and Interpol agents flooded into the bunker, their weapons drawn, shouting aggressive, deafening commands. Tristan dropped his glass of celebratory champagne, the crystal shattering into 1,000 pieces on the concrete floor. Isabella screamed hysterically as heavily armored agents threw her violently against the steel table, violently clicking heavy metal handcuffs around her expensive, manicured wrists. I walked out of the mobile command center escorted by Agent Thorne, and strolled casually into the massive Freeport bunker. I bypassed the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers and walked directly into the secure viewing room. Tristan was pinned aggressively against the wall by a massive federal marshal, his bespoke suit ruined, his face pale and contorted with absolute sheer terror. When he saw me calmly walking into the room, his eyes widened in desperate, pathetic shock. "Clara!" he screamed frantically, struggling against the heavy handcuffs. "Please. Tell them you authorized the sale. Tell them the diamond is real. They are arresting me for international smuggling." I stopped a few feet away from him, my hands casually resting in the pockets of my tailored coat. I looked at the man who had tried to systematically destroy my life, and I smiled a cold, utterly terrifying smile. "But Tristan," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the chaotic noise of the raid. "I can't tell them the diamond is real. Because it isn't." Tristan froze entirely, his brain completely short-circuiting as he tried to process my words. Isabella, who was crying loudly in the corner, suddenly stopped and stared at me in absolute horror. "What are you talking about?" Tristan choked out, his voice a pathetic, trembling whisper. I turned to the undercover agent who had just pulled out a highly specialized portable laser inscription reader. "Please scan the girdle of the stone," I instructed calmly. The agent placed the massive pink sapphire under the digital microscope. A few seconds later, the machine's digital screen beeped loudly, projecting a massive, highly magnified image onto a nearby monitor. There, etched perfectly into the side of the stone, was a stark, undeniable serial number followed by the words, "Synthetic pink sapphire, property of aura gemology. Positive identification," Agent Thorne announced loudly to the room. "This stone is a complete, total forgery." Tristan's legs completely buckled beneath him. The federal marshal had to actively hold him up by his collar just to keep him from collapsing onto the floor. The catastrophic, world-ending reality of his situation crashed down upon him. He hadn't just attempted to steal $80 million. He had actively trafficked a massive, fraudulent gemstone across international borders, attempting to commit major wire fraud against what he believed was a highly dangerous Russian criminal organization. You swapped it?" Tristan wheezed, looking at me with eyes full of pure, impotent hatred and suffocating despair. "You set me up." I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a deadly, razor-sharp whisper. "You tried to steal my life's work to fund your mistress, Tristan. I simply gave you the exact masterpiece you deserved. Empty, worthless fake." Isabella began screaming hysterically, violently turning on Tristan in a desperate attempt to save herself. "He lied to me," she shrieked at the federal agents. "I didn't know it was a fake. He swore it was the real Sovereign Rose." But her desperate, pathetic pleas fell on deaf ears. The FBI had completely seized Tristan's servers, immediately finding the massive, undeniable trail of emails proving they had actively conspired together to defraud me, steal the inventory, and execute the illegal cartel sale. They were both aggressively hauled out of the high-security bunker in handcuffs, paraded in front of the massive crowd of international news cameras that had quickly gathered outside the Freeport. Their elite reputations were instantaneously, permanently obliterated on global television. They were exposed as massive, incompetent frauds facing decades in an international federal penitentiary. I watched them get shoved into the back of a dark police transport van, feeling an incredible, overwhelming sense of absolute, total victory. The legal aftermath was incredibly swift and absolutely brutal. Because they had actively attempted to execute the massive wire transfer for a fraudulent item across international borders, the federal prosecutors charged Tristan and Isabella with massive, unprecedented counts of international wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit international smuggling. Unable to afford the astronomical legal defense required to fight the combined forces of the FBI and Interpol, they were forced to accept a harsh, unforgiving plea deal. Tristan was sentenced to 20 years in a high-security federal prison. Isabella, completely stripped of her stolen luxury assets and her inherited wealth to pay the massive restitution fines, received a 15-year sentence. My divorce was finalized with aggressive, ruthless speed. Because Tristan was a convicted federal felon who had embezzled from my corporation, my high-powered lawyers easily seized 100% of our shared marital assets, leaving him with absolutely nothing. With my enemies permanently locked behind federal bars, I returned to my secure studio in the United States. I walked past the empty vault where the fake stones had once sat, and I went straight to my highly secure hidden blind trust safe. I carefully removed the true, magnificent, completely authentic Sovereign Rose. It was perfectly safe, breathtakingly beautiful, and entirely legally mine. Because Tristan had been formally arrested for attempting to sell the forgery, he had legally and permanently abdicated any rights to the actual hidden diamond. 2 months later, acting entirely as an independent, fiercely protected agent, I personally flew to the Middle East and delivered the breathtaking $80 million masterpiece directly to the royal family. They were absolutely mesmerized by the flawless perfection of the cut. The highly public, totally legal delivery generated a staggering, life-changing sum of money and permanently cemented my legacy as the greatest master gemologist of my generation. I used my massive new wealth to completely overhaul aura gemology, transforming my business into a state-of-the-art hypersecure fortress. I hired a small, fiercely loyal team of brilliant young gemologists and security experts, ensuring that no one could ever exploit or steal from me again. I built an empire that was totally independent, highly respected, and entirely unassailable. The dramatic story of the brilliant jeweler who outsmarted her embezzling, smuggling husband leaked to the global press, turning me into an absolute industry legend. high-net-worth clients aggressively lined up, desperate to commission bespoke pieces from the woman who possessed both an unparalleled artistic eye and an utterly terrifying, unbreakable titanium spine. My profit margins skyrocketed, and I finally achieved the absolute, unshakable financial independence I had dreamed of since I was a struggling watchmaker's daughter. On a quiet, beautiful Friday evening, I sat alone in my massive, beautifully lit studio, looking through my microscope at a stunning, newly acquired raw diamond. The room was silent, perfectly climate-controlled, and filled with a profound, deep sense of peace. I had trusted the wrong man, and it had nearly cost me my entire life's work. But the betrayal had not broken me. It had subjected me to massive, immense pressure, forging my brilliant mind into an unbreakable, flawless diamond. Tristan thought he could steal my genius, replace it with cheap fakes, and sell my legacy to the highest bidder. He completely underestimated the meticulous, terrifying precision of a master gemologist. He learned the hardest, most devastating lesson imaginable. When you try to steal from the woman who controls the light, she will gladly blind you with the exact, perfect reflection of your own absolute destruction.